What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo channel, talking some college football DFS ahead of Thursday night, week 6. And we have a lot of action on deck, a 2-game slate featuring a couple very high-paced games. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. As usual, we will be bringing you behind the glass, showing you some tools we have at Awesemo. We are going to be looking at a lot of the player data today, but we also have projections, ownership projections, slate write-ups, everything you could possibly imagine for college football DFS. And let's get started right away with our marquee game of the day. It is Coastal Carolina taking on Arkansas State. A really interesting game to talk about, but one where we have an immense total overall. So on the 2-game slate, certainly a place you want to be taking a look. 72.5 point total, 19.5 point spread in favor of Coastal Carolina. They're facing the worst defense in college football, and that is not an exaggeration. Statistically, Arkansas State ranks 130th. They're allowing over 300 rushing yards per game, over 300 passing yards per game. It has not been pretty. Coastal Carolina is a slower team. They're a run-heavy team. They run a lot of power and option concepts, and that brings Grayson McCall firmly into play, not only because of team total, but because of this Arkansas State defense and his usage on the ground. McCall is entering this game banged up. He was seen in a walking boot after their last game, but according to their coaching staff, all at precaution. McCall, extremely efficient through the air. He's averaging 223 passing yards per game on just 17 attempts as Coastal Carolina has been in some blowout victories, but also very active on the ground. He's going to be your high floor, high ceiling option, a player you're likely playing in all cash environments. In the run game, Reese White splitting time with Shamari Jones. Jones has been injured as well, but he is expected to return from injury. Last time we saw Jones, he actually out-carried Reese White 16-8. That is reflected in price where you have Jones 600 more than Reese White. On FanDuel, it's the exact opposite. White is 900 more than Jones. I think you split your exposure to both of these players if you're playing multiple lineups. Otherwise, due to the nature of the near 50-50 timeshare, Shamari Jones, he looks like a bit of a weaker play compared to White. However, looking at the rushing yards per game, Shamari Jones has been more efficient. He is 96 yards per game on the ground compared to Reese White, just at 75. But both are going to be phenomenal plays. I think you can play both in the same lineup in tournaments against this poor Arkansas defense. Even a guy like Braden Bennett, who's played a larger role without Jones of late and will siphon off just a few carries here and there, could be in play for tonight's game because of matchup. In the receiving game, you have Javion Hiley, the number 1 receiver, a little bit cheaper on DraftKings than we've seen him in recent weeks. That is because he is back-to-back games of just 5 and 3 targets, but highly, extremely involved, still averaging 99.8 receiving yards per game on a 26% target share. That's just 5.8 targets per game, but again, expecting a lot of efficiency out of this team. He's somebody to look at. Tight end Isaiah Likely, only 3 targets behind Heli, but he has 281 yards compared to 499 from Hiley. Still somebody you can look at in tournaments. Cameron Brown's the wide receiver 3. He just has 16 targets on the year, but 191 yards. These Coastal Carolina players are all in play because of matchup more than anything, but Hiley is the preferred pass catcher overall, looking to get at least one running back from this team, and likely McCall as well. From Arkansas State, they're implied for 26.5 points. It's a team that is very friendly for DFS purposes. They're fast. They're very pass-heavy. Unfortunately, they do platoon their quarterbacks. It looked like James Blackman had been trending in the right direction as the starter. He started their entire Week 4 game. However, Week 5, Blackman comes out, a little bit of a poor performance, and Lane Hatcher enters the game in the second half. Hatcher has been the more efficient quarterback on the season, and he's actually been a little more mobile than Blackman, but it still appears that this is Blackman's job, at least with a small leash for the time being. That puts Blackman in play for GPPs, not trying to get to him in cash. And if for whatever reason Hatcher draws the start, he would be in play for GPPs too. But there is a strong likelihood that these two split reps to some degree. If one of them does play the whole game, the pass-heavy nature of the offense, the up-tempo nature of the offense is strong for tournaments. So I'm willing to play whoever starts the game in tournaments. In the run game, it's been a nasty timeshare. It's basically a 3-back, sometimes 4-back committee featuring Alan Lamar, Johnny Lang, Lincoln Parr, and Marcel Murray even at times. The backfield leader is going to be Alan Lamar with 10 touches per game, Johnny Lang at 8. Lang has actually been more active as a pass-catching back in recent weeks. But with that said, this is a tough situation to get to. Rather than pay down for these guys, I'd rather get up to a coastal back. There's some other backs we'll talk about in other games. Outside of tournaments, really tough to play any of these guys. If I was getting to one, it would be Allen Lamar. In the pass game, it's a tough situation to decipher here. Corey Rucker has been the clear wide receiver one, averaging 93 yards per game, 9.5 targets. That's a 19.5% target share. They just throw the ball so much that he backdoors his way into production. And from there, the Arkansas State pass catchers have started to rotate a little bit. Previously, it was Jeff Foreman and Trevilen's Hunt as clear wide receivers that were operating with full-time route shares, target shares in the offense. But Dahu Green returning from injury has somewhat muddled this. He's now seen 10 targets combined in the last 2 games. He's dropped the snap share of both Foreman and Hunt, making them all kind of ancillary GPP dart throws. But I think because the target volume is so high, you can play any of the 3. That's Dahu Green at 4,900, Jeff Foreman at 44, and Trevilen's Hunt at 4K flat. All are still in play. From there, tight end Emmanuel Stevenson is also pretty involved. He's been running around at just over 50% of the dropbacks, averaging 4.2 targets per game. If you just need a pure punt play, Emmanuel Stevenson's on the field enough to consider here. But we'll be stacking a ton of this game. Prefer to stack the coastal side and then run it back with 1 or 2 Arkansas State players. If I'm ranking them in order, it's Rucker 1, Foreman 2, Hunt 3, and Dahu Green 4. Dahu Green with the upside to play more. Again, this is a guy that was heavily involved even last year. Game 2, we have Houston taking on Tulane. This game has a 61-point total, so a little bit below what we just saw, but there is still a decent amount to target here. Houston, they have the second highest implied team total on the slate because the spread is tight. It is just 6.5 points. Tulane has been horrific on defense as well, but not as bad as Arkansas State. They're allowing just shy of 300 passing yards per game and 250 on the ground, which brings me immediately to Houston's lead back, Alton McCaskill, who has beaten out Mulbacar and Taysom Henry for the lead job. In their last game, you saw Taysom Henry with just 2 carries. You saw Mulbacar with just 6. Chandler Smith, who factors in a little bit, just 5. While McCaskill has now had 20 touches in 3 straight games. Extremely efficient as well. He's now averaging 16.2 touches per game. You can get to him with confidence as a favorite by nearly a touchdown in a very strong matchup against Tulane's bad run defense. Clayton Tune has been an efficient quarterback. He battled a hamstring injury that occurred against Rice, and in his 2 subsequent games, he has not rushed the ball at all, which does hurt his floor. He did have mobility in the past, strong mobility last year, 68 yards in the year, all that coming in the first couple games. If Tune isn't running, he's a little bit less desirable, but you can still play him in tournaments. Overall, Houston is passing about 50% of the time. They're just a little bit slower this year. Tune is pretty easy to stack if you do go this direction. Nathaniel Dell is the target alpha in the offense, 29.3% target share, 9.2 targets per game, 85 yards per game. Very easy guy to play. The wide receiver 2's actually been Christian Trahan through the first couple games. He's averaging 4.2 targets per game and 36 yards, but he's out there for a consistent role, which gives him viability on this slate. The true wide receiver 2, actually looking at wide receivers, has been Keyshawn Carter. Carter actually ran a route on 72% of dropbacks right alongside Dell last week, and no other pass catcher eclipsed 59%. So Carter would be the wide receiver 2 worth looking at. The wide receiver 3 spot is split between Jeremy Singleton and Jalen Irwin, probably not getting to them outside of tournaments. So Carter at 3.3, certainly someone you can play. Dell is the preferred option in the pass game. For Tulane, they have been fairly up-tempo and pass-heavy as well. 55% pass rate, running more plays than average. Houston's defense has been strong, and this does project to be a game, again, where we see a lot of volume for Tulane, just with Houston playing from ahead. Michael Pratt is a good dual threat. He has 110 yards on the year, somewhat mitigated by his 10 sacks taken, but he's been banged up at times. He's only averaging 214 passing yards per game. Still think you can get to Pratt with some confidence. He's eclipsed 268 yards 3 times this year, and he's had 2 performances above 296. So his pass game volume gives him a good floor. Comfortable with Pratt for sure. It's just a 2-game slate. In the running game, Genio Booker has popped up to actually be their leader in recent weeks. He's been sharing the ball with Cameron Carroll quite a bit. Tajay Spears is a change of pace, but Devin Brumfield is now transferred. Iverson Celestine isn't a factor in the team anymore. Booker is probably the top play at 4,200. Cameron Carroll is 1,000 more than him, and it's nearly been a 50-50 timeshare of late, so I'm not trying to get up to Carroll. But overall, this is a tough situation to decipher. Definitely prefer coastal backs, definitely prefer McCaskill, but in tournaments, Booker and Carroll options, even Tajay Spears to a degree. In the receiver room, Again, it's a high volume pass attack, but it's split, and it's split in a pretty nasty way. As you can see, we have 10 players with at least 10 targets, nobody above 29. The highest target share is Deuce Watts at 17%. He's only averaging 6.8 targets per game over the last 4 and 41 receiving yards. Deuce Watts isn't actually the receiver that's on the field the most either. It's actually Jatavian Tolles, who's been their most consistent player. He's run no fewer than 85% of the routes in Tulane's last 3 games. He's only averaging 39.6 receiving yards, but even Deuce Watts hasn't played as much. Watts has been the second most active receiver, and he has the most targets, so either are in play. And then the wide receiver 3 is actually Tyreek James, their tight end. He's been consistent with 63% of the routes, at least in 4 or 5 Tulane games this year. He actually leads the team with 289 receiving yards, so he's extremely active downfield too. Again, that's Jatavian Tolles, Deuce Watts, and Tyreek James is the top 3. From there, it's pretty nasty in the wide receiver rotation. You have Fat Watts, 64% of routes, Jaquan Jackson, 40%, Shea Wyatt, 33%, all just GPP plays overall. Really trying to isolate Deuce Watts, Tolles, and Tyreek James if you're playing a 2-lane pass catcher. And I do think that's where you go if you're stacking up this game. But that'll do it for us. That is the 2-game slate. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, let me know your favorite player in the comment section. Would love to hear it. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow with another slate on Friday. Make sure to hit the thumbs up button on the way out. I'm Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. We'll catch you again next time.